Chapter 15, Tempest and the School Teapot, Part 2. They were there 3 years and Gil didn't go to school, hardly any until they came back. You won't find it so easy to keep head after this, Anne. I'm glad, said Anne quickly. I couldn't really feel proud of keeping head of little boys and girls. I was just 9 or 10. I got up yesterday spelling abbreviation. Josie Pye was head, and mind you, she peeped in a book. Mr. Phillips didn't see her. He was looking at Prissy Andrews, but I did. I just swept her a look of freezing scorn, and she got as red as a beet and spelled it wrong after all. Those Pye girls are treats all round, said Diana indulgently, as they climbed the fence of the main road. Gertie Pye actually went and put a milk bottle in my place in the brook yesterday. Did you ever? I don't speak to her now. When Mr. Phillips was in the back of the room, hearing Prissy Andrews laughing, Diana whispered to Anne, "That's Gilbert Blythe sitting right across the aisle from you, Anne. Just look at him and see if you don't think he's handsome." Anne looked accordingly. She had a good chance to do so, for said Gilbert Blythe was absorbed in stealthily pinning the long yellow braid of Ruby Gillis, who sat in front of him, to the back of her seat. He was a tall boy with curly brown hair, roguish hazel eyes, and a mouth twisted into a teasing smile. Presently, Ruby Gillis started to take a sum to the master. She fell back into her seat with a little shriek, believing that her hair was pulled out by the roots. Everyone looked at her, and Mr. Phillips glared so sternly that Ruby began to cry. Gilbert had whisked the pin out of sight and was studying his history with the soberest face in the world. But then the commotion subsided, and he looked at Anne and winked with expressible drollery. "I think your Gilbert Blythe is handsome," confided Anne to Diana. "And I think he's very bold. It isn't good manners to wink at a strange girl." But it was not until the afternoon that things really began to happen. Mr. Phillips was back in the corner explaining a problem in algebra to Prissy Andrews and the rest of the scholars, who were doing pretty much as they pleased, eating green apples, whispering, drawing pictures on their slates, and driving crickets harnessed to strings up and down the aisle. Gilbert Blythe was trying to make Anne Shirley look at him, and failing utterly, because Anne was at that moment completely oblivious, not only to the very existence of Gilbert Blythe, but of every other scholar in Avonlea School, and of Avonlea School itself. With her chin propped on her hands and her eyes fixed on the blue glimpse of the lake of shining waters that the west window afforded, she was far away in a gorgeous dreamland, hearing and seeing nothing save her own wonderful visions. Oh no, I've lost my place.
Gilbert Blythe.
Gilbert Blythe wasn't used to putting himself out to make a girl look at him and meeting with failure. She should look at him, that red-haired Shirley girl with the little pointed chin and big eyes that weren't like the eyes of any other girl in Avonlea School. Gilbert reached along the table, picked up the end of Anne's long braid, held it out at arm's length, and said in a piercing whisper, "Carrots! Carrots!" Then Anne looked at him with a vengeance. She did more than look. She sprang to her feet, her bright fancies fallen into a cureless ruin. She flashed one indignant glance at Gilbert from eyes whose angry sparkle was swiftly quenched in equally angry tears. You mean hateful boy, she exclaimed passionately. How dare you? And then thwack! Anna brought a slate down on Gilbert's head and cracked it, slate, not head, clear across. Avonlea School had always enjoyed the scene. This was an especially enjoyable one. Everyone said, "Oh!" in a horrified delight. Diana gasped. Ruby Gillis, who was inclined to be hysterical, began to cry. Tommy Sloane let his team of crickets escape him altogether while he stared open-mouthed at the tableau. Mr. Phillips stalked down the aisle and laid his hand heavily on Anne's shoulder. "Anne Shirley, what does this mean?" he said angrily. Anne returned no answer. It was asking too much of flesh and blood to expect her to tell before the whole school that she had been called carrots. Gilbert it was who spoke up stoutly. "It was my fault, Mr. Phillips. I teased her." Mr. Phillips paid no heed to Gilbert. "I'm sorry to see a pupil of mine displaying such a temper and such a vindictive spirit," he said in a sullen tone, as if for mere fact of being a pupil of his hopes to root out all evil passions from the hearts of small imperfect mortals. "Anne, go and stand on the platform in front of the whiteboard for the rest of the afternoon." Anne would have infinitely preferred a whipping to this punishment, under which her sensitive spirit quivered as from a whiplash. With her white set face she obeyed. Mr. Phillips took out a chalk crayon and wrote on the blackboard above her head, "Anne Shirley has a very bad temper. Anne Shirley must learn to control her temper," and read it out loud, so that even the primer class, who couldn't read writing, could understand it. Anne stood there the rest of the afternoon with that legend above her. She did not cry or hang her head. Anger was still too hot in her heart for that, and it sustained her amid all her agony of humiliation. With resentful eyes and passion-red cheeks, she confronted alike Diana's sympathetic gaze and Charlie Sloane's indignant nods and Josie Pye's malicious smiles. As for Gilbert Blythe, she would not even look at him. She would never look at him again. She would never even speak to him. When school was dismissed, Anne marched out with her red head held high. Gilbert Blythe tried to intercept her at the porch door. "I'm awfully sorry I made fun of you here, Anne," he whispered contrarily. "Honestly, I am. Don't be mad for keeps now." Anne swept by disdainfully, without look or sign of hearing. Oh, how could you, Anne?" breathed Diana as they went down the road, half reproachfully, half admiringly. Diana felt that she could never have resisted Gilbert's plea. "I shall never forgive Gilbert Blythe," said Anne firmly. "And Mr. Phillips spelled my name without an E too. The iron has entered my soul, Diana." Diana hadn't the least idea what Anne meant, but she understood it was something terrible. "You mustn't mind Gilbert making fun of your hair," she said soothingly. "Why, he makes fun of all girls. He laughs at mine because it's so black. He's called me a crow a dozen times, and I've never heard him apologise for anything before either. There's a great deal of difference between being called a crow and being called carrots," and said Anne with dignity. "Gilbert Blythe has hurt my feelings excruciatingly.
Excruciatingly.
Excruciatingly. I think I've said that right. Diana, it is possible the matter might have been blown over without any more, excruciation, if nothing else had happened. But when things began to happen, they are apt to keep on. Avonlea scholars often spent noon hour picking gum in Mr. Bell's spruce grove over the hill and across his big pasture field. From there they could keep an eye on Eben Wright's house, where the master boarded. When they saw Mr. Phillips emerging therefrom, they ran for the schoolhouse, but the distance being about 3 times longer than Mr. Wright's lane, they were very apt to arrive there, breathless and gasping, some 3 minutes too late. On the following day, Mr. Phillips was seized with one of his spasmodic fits of reform, and announced before going to dinner that he should expect to find all the scholars in their seats when he returned. Anyone who came in late would be punished. All the boys and some girls went to Mr. Bell's spruce grove as usual, fully intending to stay only long enough to pick a true. But spruce groves are seductive, and yellow nuts of gum beguiling. They picked and loitered and strayed, and as usual, the first thing that recalled them to a sense of flight of time was Jimmy Glover shouting from the top of a patriarchal old spruce. "Master's coming!" The girls who were on the ground started first and managed to reach the schoolhouse in time, but without a second to spare, the boys, who had to wriggle hastily down from the trees, were later, and Anne, who had not been picking gum at all, but was wandering happily in the far end of the grove, waist deep among the bracken, singing softly to herself, or a wreath of rice lilies on her hair, as if she was some wild divinity of the shadowy places, was latest of all. Anne could run like a deer, however. Run she did, with the impish result that she overtook the boys at the door and was swept into the schoolhouse among them, just as Mr. Phillips was in the act of hanging up his hat.